It's not common in Chico that we have, well, too many international visitors, people who are presenting that way and doing events bilingually. I think it's really valuable that we have this sort of connection. So we know that around the country, around the world, there's movements of authoritarianism that have gained a lot of ground. This affects us in our communities in a lot of ways, and I could go on, but I'm not here to be a presenter. So first off, I want to say thank you all for showing up. Thank you everybody who's taken a part in this. I'm going to do more extensive thank yous later because a lot of people had a part in making this as successful as it is. But first I want to introduce Ted, who's a director of Global Exchange that's been putting on this Democracy Defenders Roadshow here, just to talk about what's been happening around the country and the kind of events they've been having, which the last one was in New York, and this one's here in Chico. We're very proud to be following up New York in a nationwide roadshow. Let me pass it off to Ted, and then I'll introduce our moderator and our speakers.
All right, do I get to stand up on the wall?
You can do whatever you want, Ted.
All right.
Where a freak is that?
Let's see. Here, take my coffee for me.
I got you.
All right, give it back to me. Thank you. All right, hey, it's so nice to be in Chico this morning. Good to see such a nice.
That's where it comes.
Aha. Can you hear me okay? All right, that's better. Thank you, Addison. And thank you, Addison. Thank you, Will. Thank you to the California Trade Justice Coalition for working with us to put on this event. A couple years ago, Donald Trump got reelected, and I think for a lot of people that was a very questionable moment. Like now what? What are we going to do? And because Global Exchange, and that's where I work, Global Exchange, it's a human rights organization based down in San Francisco, California. We've had a lot of people from the Chico area who've worked with us over the years. I'm looking around for them right now. I hope they'll come to some of the later events. But when that happened, we reached out to a lot of our friends in Latin America, people that we've worked with, and said, hey, how are you seeing this? And there was a lot of fear and anxiety across the hemisphere, because they realized, like I think a lot of us did, that this isn't going to stop at our borders. The kind of things that are going to happen when you put fascists in power, and people who have a mentality that is one of destruction of institutions, rolling over the things that for better or for worse, the United States has done right. We at Global Exchange have had a critique of U.S. foreign policy and the bad things that the United States has done for years. But sometimes, we lean so hard into that we forget about all the things that were going right in the United States and places where people were doing the right kind of research. And anyhow, I digress. Addison told me to be, to not take up the whole show here. But what we did was we got together down in Guatemala, a bunch of us from Canada, the United States, Mexico, Honduras. There are like 14 countries involved. And we all sat down together under the banner of Democracy's Under Attack. How do we move from a crisis to a strategy? So all the people that you're about to hear today, and if you do need to hear them in English and you don't understand Spanish, please get a headset. It's going to be critical to make it work. But we all got together and we talked about what can we do next. And we've done a lot of things. Our speakers will talk about it. But one of the things we've done is to bring folks up here to the United States to compare notes, and to build a movement that goes across borders. So we started out in Minneapolis in late June, went down to Chicago, South Bend, Indiana, Kalamazoo, Michigan, Louisville, Kentucky. We talked with local leaders, folks like Addison in the Midwestern versions or the Southern versions of him, folks who are getting out there and doing things and, taking on the challenges of this moment. And so we, as Addison mentioned, we just were up in Philadelphia, New York, a couple different stops in New Jersey, talking with all kinds of different people. So it's really heartening to see so many folks come out this early to talk about one of the aspects of the roadshow, which is the idea of how do we work together as communications mediums. And so that's, I think, what the is going to be the focus this morning, and I'll end it there. Just one more time, thanking you so much for turning out today.
Thank you, Ted. Thank you, Global Exchange, for all the work that you guys are putting on to bring communities like ours into the fold and these things. So in doing this, I wanted to bring somebody on to help facilitate the discussion that has also experience, not me, but has experience kind of fighting locally for such things. And I'm very proud every time I get to work with Catalina Sanchez, who is a Gridley City Councilwoman. She's the first Latina elected in Gridley. Yeah. Even though if you know Gridley, you would think that would be a really common thing, but Catalina is holding it down there. She's been in office longer than I have. I'm very happy to have her moderating this discussion. She's going to introduce our guests from Latin America. So just give it up for Catalina. Thanks. You don't have to stand on the wall. You can stand wherever you want.
Hi, bienvenidos, welcome. Oh, there we go. Rookie mistake. Bienvenidos, welcome. My name, as Addison said, Catalina Sanchez, hailing from the beautiful town of Gridley in South Butte County. We are excited to be here today. Thank you for showing up. I know it's going to be warm, so if you need water or anything, please help yourself to refreshments in the back. If you are feeling ill, please feel free to reach out to one of the organizers so that we can assist you. We'll go ahead and get started with our first question. So, for the panelists here today, what do you believe is the single greatest challenge facing American democracy today in 2026? And what evidence has most influenced your thoughts on that?
I think we have an uninformed American public.
Turn it around. Turn it, yeah.
There you go. Am I doing this right? Yeah. Oh, I can hear myself. I think one of the biggest challenges is, and part of this, one of the reasons why I was enthusiastic about the event is that I worked as a foreign correspondent 10 years in Mexico. One of the things I saw during my time in Mexico was I saw people mobilizing in the face of corruption and election fraud in ways that I found very hopeful and inspiring. So I think, the purpose of this whole event is really wonderful because we need to hear about how things work in Latin America, where people have been engaged in these struggles for so very long. But I really do believe that information, access to information, and access to fact-based information is really key here. And I just meet people all of the time who have no idea where to find good journalism. And it really is out there. We have great reporting going on right now, but it's all moving toward online venues, and it's not what people think of or know how to find. And so there's just there's like 50 million Americans who have no access to local news. And I'm a big believer in local news because I think people care about the communities they live in, and it gives them a way to see what's happening on a bigger scale in a more focused way.
Thank you, Leslie. Ernesto, I'm going to go ahead and also get your take on this question that I will reiterate. So again, what do you believe is the single greatest challenge towards American democracy? And I know recently you have been in Havana, Cuba. I saw your video reporting there in terms of the situation that's occurring, how Cubans are reacting to the situation, and how the government is responding or the lack of response. So fill us in on your thoughts here.
Okay. Bueno, gracias y gracias por recibirnos acá. Bueno, mi nombre es Ernesto Ledesma, soy periodista de un medio de comunicación de México que se llama Rompeviento TV. Y transmitimos online y en televisión abierta en las televisoras públicas en varios estados de los Estados Unidos. Hemos hecho un trabajo periodístico ya no solamente de Cuba, que recientemente estuvimos por ahí, acabamos de venir también de las elecciones en Colombia, y estuvimos en las elecciones en Honduras, y estuvimos en las elecciones en Guatemala, y vamos haciendo una radiografía de la incidencia que está teniendo el gobierno de los Estados Unidos en países que no son el suyo, evidentemente, y que está generando pues una alarma y una preocupación pues importante. Nosotros en el análisis que hacemos, pensamos que como nunca antes en la historia, por lo menos en este siglo XXI, hemos, no solamente Estados Unidos, no solamente el continente americano, sino el planeta entero, depende mucho ahora del pueblo de los Estados Unidos. Los procesos electorales y democráticos en los Estados Unidos se han convertido en un punto importante. Yo tengo 25 años viajando a Palestina, en Cisjordania, en Gaza, en Egipto, en los campos de refugiados en Jordania, en Cuba, ahora que venimos recientemente. Y lo que está pasando en nuestros pueblos y en las comunidades, en Chiapas, en Guerrero, en Michoacán, en varias entidades, la venta de armas, por ejemplo, de los Estados Unidos que está llegando de manera legal o ilegal a nuestro país, nos está fracturando de una manera muy importante. Hay más desplazamiento de poblaciones, más personas que intentan llegar acá, y por el otro lado, las políticas de acá, hay más represión que estamos viendo contra la población migrante en prácticamente todo el país. No les voy a contar a ustedes algo que les toca ver y vivir e identificar en distintas entidades de los Estados Unidos. Nosotros pensamos que ahorita hay una crisis democrática importante, y como nunca antes habíamos visto donde un presidente puede interferir públicamente a cielo abierto en los procesos electorales en otros países y decidir quién va a ser el presidente y las políticas que se van a implementar ahí. Así que no es un tiempo, o más bien es un tiempo que creo que no nos había tocado ver. Y en pueblos y en comunidades siempre hay momentos complicados, pero creo que ahorita, como este momento, no nos había tocado antes. Por eso la importancia y el agradecimiento, uno, que estén ustedes aquí y que haya una escucha, ¿no? Y que podamos hacer el ejercicio de pensar juntas y juntos y decir, bueno, pues tenemos que hacer algo, no podemos quedarnos con los brazos cruzados. Y el hecho de que ustedes estén aquí y que haya personas que organicen este tipo de actividades, pues es eso, es que le estamos dando una oportunidad a la palabra y a la escucha. Así que gracias por estar acá.
Thank you, Ernesto, for setting up the floor there for us. And I think, Minor, you had a couple words to add.
Sí. Gracias, mucho gusto. Yo soy principalmente activista. Ok. ¿Me escuchan ahí?
Sí, cuando hablen en el micrófono más cerca, aquí.
Ok.
Ahí, ajá, there you
Here? Ok.
go. Casi a la boca. Sí, gracias.
Bueno, principalmente soy activista, pero en Guatemala estudié ciencia política y me dedico a la investigación de movimientos sociales en todo el país y cuando se puede en los países vecinos. Y esta es la primera vez que estoy en Estados Unidos. He podido aprender y reflexionar mucho a través de la comparación y el contraste. Y quisiera plantear tres cosas o tres reflexiones sobre los retos que tiene la democracia actualmente en Estados Unidos, pero también en el mundo. Y el primero es que no hay una democracia. Y creo que eso es lo que tenemos que tener claro. A mí me cambió la vida cuando en la universidad me hicieron entender que la democracia no es natural, no es tangible, no es real. La roca es real y la puedo tocar. La madera, el tornillo es real. Pero democracia, justicia, república son conceptos que nos contamos a nosotros mismos como ciudadanos, como civilización, como cultura, que tiene un sentido según el espacio y el momento en el que vivimos. Y que lo que hoy entendemos por democracia no fue lo mismo que entendió Washington hace 250 años, ni será lo mismo que entenderán dentro de 15 años nuestros descendientes. Y eso es muy importante, porque entonces ahí podemos ver que no es que la democracia esté fallando, es que se está transformando en función de quienes tienen el poder real. Y hoy, a las grandes élites económicas, la democracia que ellos mismos defendieron durante mucho tiempo para ponerse como los buenos ante los comunistas, les dejó de servir. Y ahora tenemos el reto de cómo poder usar ese concepto que ha sido muy manipulado de democracia para el fin último, que es defender la dignidad humana, ¿verdad? Y eso a mí me parece muy importante de entender, porque bajo ese concepto no tenemos ninguna democracia que defender. Tenemos muchas democracias que ejercer. Tenemos que hacer democracia. Y la democracia no tiene una receta, ni lo da una ley, ni lo da un edificio, ni lo da un político. La democracia es ese concepto que todos tenemos en común, en donde por encima de todo se va a priorizar la dignidad humana. La segunda reflexión es esa, ¿qué es la democracia? Y a mí personalmente me gusta mucho entender que democracia es, por encima de todo, actuar de manera colectiva. ¿Por qué? Porque actuar solo es más rápido, es más rico, es hasta más eficiente si lo quieren ver así. Yo llego más rápido corriendo solo posiblemente que poniéndome de acuerdo con un grupo de personas. Pero las soluciones a las que llegamos de manera colectiva son más sustentables, son más justas para todos, son más fáciles de sostener en el tiempo y garantizan más la dignidad humana de todas las personas que estamos presentes. Y entonces, al final de cuentas, la democracia no es ir a votar cada 4 años. La democracia es una decisión de vida, una decisión del día a día, la decisión de no decirle a mi vecino, no quiero saber nada de ti, sino salir y mira, pongámonos de acuerdo, hagamos esto juntos. Tal vez yo podría hacerlo solo, tal vez hasta sería más cómodo, pero decido hacerlo junto contigo, porque creo que es lo correcto, porque esa es mi apuesta, porque es más digno para ti, es más digno para mí y es más digno para todos. Entonces, ¿qué es la democracia? No es votar, es una decisión diaria de ejercer una cultura en donde ponernos de acuerdo es la prioridad. Y sobre todo en estos tiempos en donde es tan fácil segmentarnos, en donde yo puedo entrar a redes sociales y puedo buscar a quién le gustan los árboles y olvidarme de todos los que le gusta cualquier otra cosa. Y dentro del grupo de árboles voy a encontrar a quién le gusta el oak. Y entonces ya le dejo ignorar a todos los que no les gustan el oak, solo me concentro con ellos. Y dentro de los oak, ¿a quién le gusta específicamente los que tienen cierto color en otoño? Y entonces ignoro a todos los demás. Es muy fácil dividirnos, es muy fácil tomar la decisión de juntarse solo con el que piensa como yo. Es muy cómodo hacer eso. Y no es malo quien lo hace, no es malo, pero no es una decisión democrática. cada instante en el que yo me alejo de alguien que piensa diferente, porque qué pesado es soportarlo. Estamos cayendo en una trampa del individualismo que está alimentando los monstruos que tienen hoy el poder real. Esa es la segunda. La tercera reflexión, y con esto termino, perdón que estoy hablando mucho, es la democracia o los ciudadanos en Estados Unidos deben entender el peso que su sociedad tiene en el resto del mundo. Yo vengo de un país pequeño, abajo de México, muy pequeño, que apenas tiene 18 millones de personas, pero lo que sucede aquí me afecta a mí directamente. Nosotros tuvimos 3 años de movilizaciones masivas para poder derrocar a un presidente y meterlo a la cárcel. Todo parecía ir muy bien. Estábamos a punto de lograr un cambio y de repente Trump entró a la presidencia y nos botó todo en un abrir y cerrar de ojos. Y no es algo simbólico, no es por lo que Trump representa, no. Directamente mandó una orden a su encargado de negocios en mi país y esta persona llamó a cada uno de los congresistas y votaron absolutamente todo lo que nos había costado años construir. Y eso no pasa solo en Guatemala, eso pasa en todo el mundo. Y la dictadura que ustedes tienen en Estados Unidos no implica que su poder se ejerza únicamente en Estados Unidos. Al ser el país más poderoso y tener las instituciones más poderosas, impone e impacta en todos lados. Y a mí mi maestro me enseñó que a problemas internacionales, soluciones internacionales. Y a problemas transnacionales, soluciones transnacionales. Ya no pueden solamente los estadounidenses hablar de la democracia estadounidense, porque sus tiranos están afectando a todo el mundo. Y tienen un poder más grande que el que cualquiera de nosotros se puede imaginar. Entonces, para mí, la única manera de combatir las tiranías como las que Donald Trump nos tiene en todo el mundo es extender fuertes lazos, esfuerzos conscientes de solidaridad, de organización, de diálogos. Y creo que por eso es tan importante el trabajo que estamos haciendo con este roadshow.
Muchas gracias, Minor. So what I'm hearing you talk about right now is that democracy is also not just a concept, but it's almost a culture, and it's about collective action. And that action should not take place every 4 years, as he mentioned, but rather daily, weekly, not just when there's crises, but also to organize, to also celebrate our wins and what things are working. Just as much as we organize and engage actively when things are not working. And I think, Michael, you had a little bit of comments to add to this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments on international and national type perspective. I'm a reporter here in Chico, and often I think of the local issues. It is really a tough job to get to that higher level of sophistication to make any sense of that. I'm lucky I can go to city council meeting and ask councilors questions. I guess something I can add to these sophisticated folks' comments is maybe one fundamental thing is the relationship between policymakers and people who are affected by the policy. I think there might be some kind of cognitive dissonance between are the folks in power listening to us, or are the folks in power are they even able to listen to what's on the ground? And I was speaking with Leslie. Here locally, I'm one of 3 full-time reporters at Chico Enterprise Record. I believe at one point we had 20 reporters, and there are important stories out there that these policymakers are affecting, our residents, and we can't necessarily get to them all because there's that cognitive dissonance. There's only, a few people doing the traditional role of, relaying information, and there's so much stuff on the internet that we don't know if our policymakers are listening to us. And so if I could maybe add one thing is, somebody's got to figure out the economics of how we get the voice, to city council. I have one more kind of recollection is, let's see, back in the 60s in Oroville, there was a group of concerned citizens that were worried that the children in the area were getting tooth decay. And Oroville is actually one of the first, the people of Oroville, one of the first folks to push for citywide fluoridation in their water. And you could read, newspapers back then that 30, 40, 50 people would come to city council. They'd say, hey, we need this. And 2 years ago, when I wrote the story that they removed fluoride from Oroville, there were 0 residents there. There was one expert from UC Berkeley who came, to talk about dentistry, but that's what democracy looks like now. People are so busy at their jobs. It's hard to have a full lifestyle of getting to that city council meeting and putting your voice in. The only other alternative while people are at work is to trust people like journalists to do the job. But I wish there were 50, 100 of us, We might be covering something here in Chico, and it's super important, and I need to jump on it. But then I remember the people up in Cohasset 2 years ago were burnt out from the park fire, and they still, to this day, don't have another emergency exit. There's a lot of stories everywhere, and democracy it's tough because of this cognitive dissonance. I don't really have an answer for that, but that's kind of my 2 cents. Thank you, guys.
Can I add to that? Thank you, Michael. Those were such important comments. And, I founded ChicoSoul.org as a nonprofit, independent online news site, mostly to fill the void I saw in local reporting in this town, and because other newspapers were shrinking. And so what we're seeing is, really a marketplace failure with the old models of journalism. But Michael and I were talking before the event about how neither of us, he's one of 3 full-time reporters. I have 1 full-time reporter plus some incredibly talented freelancers. And, we just broke the big story about Chico Police and where their data's going. But we did that with literally almost no resources except for a very generous, loyal, and wonderful donor base that, a lot of our donors donate $25 a month or $25 a year. And that's how we're operating. So Chico Soul was really founded as kind of an experiment 19 years ago to see if we could build some other kind of model. We know now that we can, and that this is possible. It's being done in communities all over the country. But, we need the enterprise record. We need Michael. We need independent news. We've got to figure out how to put together something that works for all of us. And so I just want to say, to people who have been supporting us, thank you so much.
Thank you, Leslie. And just for the audience, if anyone does want to shift over towards the shade down below, please feel free to do so. We want to keep folks comfortable as best as possible. And I know, Ernesto, you have a comment, but if you can hold that thought. Omar, I want to loop you into this conversation, especially given your experience as a special prosecutor and being part of the legal system in Mexico. But also right now with everything that's going on, I know we're talking about democracy, and what ties into democracy is the Constitution and liberties, but also public trust in these institutions, right? In our court system, in how lawyers and judges utilize our rights under the Constitution to ensure justice. But right now, a lot of that public trust in these institutions, not just the court system, but in government, universities, and the media, has declined. So what responsibility do you see lawyers and then also journalists having to help rebuild that trust without becoming a direct advocate of those institutions that you're bringing to light?
Muchísimas gracias por la pregunta, gracias por el espacio, gracias por estar aquí. Yo soy un abogado, y un abogado que está convencido de que la democracia descansa sobre pilares importantes como lo es la libertad de expresión, como lo es un catálogo de derechos que están establecidos en las constituciones, como lo es la división de poderes, como lo es los contrapesos, pero más importante como lo es, y retomo un poco lo que Minor estaba compartiendo con ustedes, el poder que tienen las personas en un Estado, ¿no? Las instituciones, ¿no? Es decir, el Estado como tal que se crea, son incluso contrapesos mismos del poder. Es la forma del diseño clásico que tuvimos de Estado y de democracia. Y en ese sentido, la utilización de las instituciones, aunque estén cooptadas, no irradian o no controlan todo la vida de las personas. Y esos pequeños recovecos, esos pequeños espacios que se quedan abiertos en la utilización del poder que ellos piensan que controlan y que dominan absolutamente todo, son los espacios que hay que utilizar. Y es la libertad de expresión, es la prensa independiente, es comunidades y pueblos indígenas defendiendo su autonomía, su territorio, es personas que se organizan para contrarrestar la construcción de una represa, o etcétera, ese tipo de espacios. Yo soy un abogado defensor de derechos humanos. Por 13 años trabajé en Naciones Unidas en una oficina especializada en temas de derechos humanos. Después ocurrió un caso muy importante en México, que es la desaparición de 43 estudiantes de Ayotzinapa. Inmediatamente sucede este caso, yo estaba trabajando en la ONU, me vinculo al caso y fue como un gancho que agarró mi vida. Y a raíz de ahí empecé a trabajar solo a Ayotzinapa, con un grupo de expertos que llegó, que eso fue interesante porque el Estado, imagínense el priismo puro y duro de México, dijeron, podemos convencer a 5 expertos extranjeros que vengan acá, se acoplan a lo que nosotros pensamos y decimos. Y lo que demostraron estos 5 expertos, yo trabajé con ellos, fue que bajo la autonomía, un propio criterio, una forma apegada a estándares de derechos humanos, la investigación que se había hecho para cubrir la verdadera desaparición de los estudiantes no era real. Y eso dinamitó, ¿no?, el poder del Estado, la estructura del Estado. Y eso generó un cambio en la organización incluso de las víctimas, en la organización social de México, y reflejó y salió a la luz un fenómeno mucho más triste y cruel, que era la desaparición en ese momento de alrededor de 40,000 personas en el país. Ahorita estamos hablando de 135,000 personas desaparecidas en México, una crisis humanitaria. Entonces, esos pequeños cambios, esas pequeñas formas, esos pequeños empujes son los que generan y dinamitan en un momento ese supuesto control, esa idea de control del poder que tiene sobre la población, sobre el pueblo. Después yo seguí trabajando el caso, estuve viviendo en Washington con un mecanismo internacional, trabajando sobre el caso mismo, y después tuve la oportunidad de poder llegar a mi país y ser el fiscal especial para la investigación de ese caso. Y ustedes no se imaginarán los retos y los desafíos internos dentro de la maquinaria del Estado que uno tiene que burlar para poder acceder a verdad y justicia. Y ese tipo de situaciones, les digo, son las pequeñas esquinas que con creatividad, con libertad, con un grupo de gente alrededor, ¿no?, porque en ese momento hubo una asistencia internacional muy importante de México. Esto lo facilitó el presidente, el primer presidente de Morena, Andrés Manuel López Obrador. Se creó como un conjunto de instituciones que avanzaron y rompieron los diques de la impunidad, dejaron que la verdad empezara a salir, la investigación fluyera, y eso nos posicionó en el caso más emblemático en los últimos 50 años en otro nivel de responsabilidad de autoridades, para llegar a concluir que las autoridades mismas del Estado habían tenido una participación directa en la desaparición de los estudiantes de Ayotzinapa. Encontramos restos de varios de ellos, hubo una serie de acciones legales y de maquinaria del Estado que se utilizó justo para avanzar en la verdad y la justicia del caso. Cuando llegamos a una cadena de responsabilidad que era muy evidente, era muy clara, que tocaba a las Fuerzas Armadas en mi país, ahí dijeron, para Omar, aquí no puedes más, ¿no? Y esa es la razón por la que yo vivo en Estados Unidos. Pero yo quiero resaltar eso, o sea, es lo importante, ¿no? Y lo clave de los ejercicios para contrarrestar el poder son la organización, esos pequeños recovecos, la imaginación de crear nuevos escenarios y sobre todo la utilización misma del Estado. El Estado tiene que investigarse a sí mismo, el Estado tiene que hacerse responsable a sí mismo de sus acciones. Por eso los sistemas de accountability, de rendición de cuentas, son tan importantes que no es necesario perderlos, sino al contrario, es necesario seguir impulsando, aún en los peores escenarios, esos mecanismos de rendición de cuentas. Y eso lo que fortalece es el Estado de Derecho. Es lo que fortalece a la democracia y es lo que fortalece las libertades de las personas. Entonces, yo estoy un firme convencido que hay que utilizarlos, hay que seguirlos demandando, hay que seguirlos poniendo, hay que seguirlos evidenciando para que desde esa forma ustedes tengan incluso mayor información. Ahorita estoy trabajando en Centroamérica, estoy ayudando pequeñas organizaciones en entender sus casos, ¿no? O sea, es la experiencia que yo tuve de entender un megacaso como lo fue Ayotzinapa, esa misma experiencia estoy tratando de llevarla a otros espacios, a otras organizaciones, a otros movimientos. Y lo que más reivindica estas luchas es la dignidad de las personas. Entonces, sean dignos de la sociedad en la que están, ¿no? Yo creo que eso es importantísimo también. Gracias.
So what I'm hearing also is that just as we are holding our government and our institutions accountable, the institutions and government should also hold themselves accountable internally, right? With our processes, with our procedures. And so that's a great segue into what issue, and it can be anything, whether it's education, science, religion. Do you think that the public fundamentally misunderstands because of how it's covered in the media? Ernesto?
Bueno, gracias otra vez. Yo retomando un poco también los comentarios que hizo el compañero sobre el periodismo local, el periodismo internacional. Miren, nosotros en nuestra experiencia siempre dependemos del periodismo local. No podemos hacer nuestro trabajo en ningún país, en ningún estado, en ninguna ciudad, si no tenemos el trabajo de compañeros, colegas que hacen un trabajo de campo, de base, que conocen. Más adelante vamos a pasar algunos videos en el otro evento del trabajo que se hace en campo, porque la parte fundamental para nosotras y nosotros es que tiene que hablar las víctimas, que tienen que hablar la gente de esas comunidades. Es el testimonio de ellos y de ellas lo que tenemos que estar escuchando, porque es quien están enfrentando esa situación. Para mí un elemento que creo que no estamos viendo o que no se está visibilizando es qué es lo que estamos normalizando. Por ejemplo, se ha normalizado que Donald Trump pueda ordenar asesinar gente que trabaja en lancheros en el continente americano. En el Pacífico, en el Caribe, pueden ordenar bombardear embarcaciones sin siquiera detenerlos, sin abrir un debido proceso, nada, es permiso para matar. Y eso está normalizado, no es un escándalo. Hace un rato le preguntaba a la compañera, ¿por qué casi no hay latinos aquí? ¿Dónde están los paisas? Aquí ahorita en este espacio, ¿no? Y eso también se ha normalizado, ¿no? Se normalizó que ahora hay algo tenebroso que se dice MAGA, ¿no? Que incluso ha desplazado hasta los republicanos. Y entonces ahora los compañeros corren un riesgo si vienen aquí. no hay una garantía. Y estamos en California, ¿no? Lo que estamos documentando en Texas y lo que pasó en Minneapolis, ¿no? Que finalmente, cuando empezaron a asesinar sin castigo a los perpetradores, a compañeros y compañeras de los Estados Unidos en Minneapolis, pues claro que estamos viendo que es algo que de ninguna manera podemos dejar o permitir que se normalice eso, ¿no? Tuvo que haber una rebelión importante, y me parece que la parte fundamental es en la construcción de procesos democráticos, es conocer y entender la dimensión del tiempo para poder conocer esos procesos democráticos y construirlos. ¿Cómo construimos algo que no se rompa tan fácil? Esa parte que nosotros estamos viendo que se ha normalizado de una manera dramática. Estábamos viendo el mes de junio pasado de este año 2026, pues se rompió el récord de detenciones y de homicidios contra migrantes en centros de detención por parte de ICE. En junio de este año es ayer, ¿no? Y eso también está normalizado. Y me parece que lo que hay que colocar un reflector importante es qué estamos normalizando y cómo nos empezamos a organizar para parar eso ahí. No puedes ordenar, ejecutar, asesinar a personas sin que haya una consecuencia. Por eso vuelvo al punto con el que cerré, y con esto vuelvo a cerrar ahorita, con el que cerré hace un rato. El tiempo democrático y político que están viviendo en Estados Unidos es crucial para la humanidad. Tienen una responsabilidad, y perdón que les esté cargando esa responsabilidad, no es solo de ustedes, es de todos nosotras y nosotros, pero es una responsabilidad enorme. Va la vida de miles de personas en varias partes del mundo, incluyendo los Estados Unidos. Así de importante es el proceso democrático ahorita en los Estados Unidos y la decisión que ustedes tomen.
Thank you, Ernesto. That was a very jarring yet accurate comment and statement in regards to the state of our media and our community, and how in a way we are becoming desensitized and things are becoming normalized, not just in our region, not just in California, but throughout the country. And Leslie and Michael, I'd be curious to hear what your experience has been in reporting not just on national and state news, but locally. Do you feel that your readers, do you feel that our community is becoming numb and desensitized to what maybe 40 years ago we all would have... The translation sounds a little low.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, take us through what you are experiencing, Leslie and Michael.
The question is if our readers are understanding or are desensitized to some of the things. I don't know. Yeah. Sometimes I wonder if I'm desensitized to this stuff. I mean, I'm exposed to so many things, and it seems like every year things get worse and worse and worse. And so, I mean, you see it more than me that, you know, that becomes normalized. You know, for example, you know, in Chico, I don't know. I don't think I'm old enough to know. Because I know, for example, like I cover homelessness in Chico. Things like eviction from a park maybe 30 years ago, it wouldn't have made the news. It was very regular. After this Warren v. Chico thing, Ooh. After after the city was sued for trying to evict homeless camps, and that came, I guess, from a part of democracy, we actually could take a quick or like a more in-depth look of how police, treat people on the street. They had to, they just had a lot more requirements than that they did, say, in the 90s, 80s, 70s, where they can just kind of shoot people along and not care where they go. So I'm not sure if I'm desensitized sometimes, because I don't know what it was like 20 years ago, and sometimes I'm afraid as a media maker to perpetuate that desensitization. So that's my perspective. So thank you.
We're all trying.
Thank you, Michael. Leslie, did you have anything you wanted to add as well?
Always. Thank you, Michael, for that honesty. Wow. I'm really, really hot, and I would like to know, I've been dying to go over and say to Mark Steeman, how many too hot days have we had this year? I want to know what we're going to do about this, and when we get to start talking about climate change again, and how we can cover it even locally in a way that people will get it. But we're so busy now trying to survive, trying to protect democracy, trying to protect the First Amendment, that we don't get to talk about climate anymore. And I'm really worried about my own daughter and what kind of world she's going to be living in. Hello?
Wild suggestion, but try to invite one of the climate scientists who was fired to come and speak about it.
He was fired?
I met people from the federal government who lost their jobs because of all this nonsense.
Sure.
It
But
stands to reason if we reach out and we can find someone to come and be a guest speaker.
exactly.
Sobering account of exactly what happened.
Exactly. So, but we have to find a way to keep covering climate, because we're burning up the world. And when I see the pictures of fires in Europe, I'm horrified. And, we've all lived through the Camp Fire and enough tragedies that we've got to get this somehow back on the menu. I think Ernesto covered it really well, but foreign policy, immigration, and democracy are all issues that aren't being covered very well in the mainstream media. And, it's hard for Americans to grasp foreign policy. It always has been. I keep writing stories about immigration, and I keep seeing comments on social media like, get the illegals out, they're criminals. And no matter how many times I write a story about somebody who has no criminal violation or conviction and is deported, even if they have legal residency, it seems to not reach a certain sector of the population. And somehow that story has to get into mainstream media. And so those of us in independent media keep covering it, because sooner or later they'll figure it out and pick it up. And in a few cases they have. And I think election interference isn't being covered very well, right now. And that is really a frightening thing. Those are some of the things that I'm really worried about.
Thank you, Leslie. And so just to kind of segue, because I know it is getting pretty warm out, we're going to wrap it up. And hopefully, and yes, we will continue the conversation indoors. So at 12:30, please join us for lunch, stick around. We'll continue the conversation, but just given the elements, again, we want to make sure that everyone is safe and okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a rapid fire round. So I'm going to give you guys 30 seconds to give us one final thought. Or if there's a question that you felt you were surprised we had not discussed, then you have 30 seconds to share that. Who wants to go first? And you will be timed. So the pressure is on. You go first? Okay.
I just want to add one more thought about desensitization. Maybe one thing to focus on is the importance of being sensitive. I often think of our information system as a nervous system. Say if we get a scab on our arm, we have nerves there to feel the pain and to understand what needs to be done. We gotta send white blood cells there, do all these things. If we don't have enough sensitivity, we don't know what issues to work on. So when it comes to a small scale as a single family's domestic violence issue to something larger like, international killings. Being sensitive is important to everybody, from the large scale to small scale. And we ought to keep remembering to be sensitive, even in this noisy world. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Ernesto, so what is one final thought, or if there was one question you thought we were going to ask but did not, you have 30 seconds.
Sí. No, básicamente agradecer, y que yo creo que valdría muchísimo la pena que medios como Chico Sol pudieran convocar a un encuentro para que la gente pueda colocar los temas de agenda importantes, porque el trabajo que hacen estos medios de comunicación para nosotros son una brújula, un rumbo. Hey, ahí está pasando esto, tenemos que ir y documentar lo que está pasando allá, y tenemos que darle un reflector todavía mayor a ese tipo de problemas. Y si vemos que es sistemático, que está pasando en otras ciudades, en otras entidades, entonces es algo estratégico que se está haciendo contra esas poblaciones y que tenemos que ver cómo podemos apoyar.
Thank you. Minor?
Entiendo que acá hay varios grupos organizados, y cuando nosotros nos organizamos normalmente es a partir de un problema o de una necesidad en común. Pero es importante entender que necesitamos el apoyo de todas las demás personas para poder avanzar, pero no todos estarán siempre al mismo nivel de compromiso con nuestros temas. Y un error muy recurrente como colectivos es exigirle a la gente ese compromiso, cuando creo que muchas veces lo que nos correspondería es empezar a exponer los problemas, las necesidades, las dificultades que nos permitan empatizar, y luego empezar a ponernos todos al mismo nivel y organizarnos. Solamente organizados podremos arribar a grandes decisiones, y todo proceso de organización es una lucha de largo aliento. Entonces no tenemos que abordarlo desde lo racional, tenemos que darle prioridad a lo emocional. Y el enojo, la ira, es una energía que prende rápido, pero que nos desgasta, nos agota. Por tanto, para luchas de largo aliento, trabajemos siempre desde la esperanza.
I think that Catalina is a wonderful moderator and asked all the right questions, and I think you're a wonderful audience because you came out under these hot climatic conditions to do this with us. Thank you so much. And somehow I think we have to figure out how to get compassion and empathy back into, it's okay to be compassionate and empathetic, and I'm not sure how we're going to do that, but we've got to do it.
Thank you, Leslie. And Omar?
Una idea de... aquí frente a mí está el Guernica, que es una pintura que reflejó un momento muy exacto de la guerra en España. Y tiene, si ustedes ven, tiene un par de velas, una lámpara al final, en la parte de arriba. Y para mí eso, por ejemplo, pueden ser sus defensores. Hay personas que han tomado un paso hacia adelante, que están defendiendo causas importantes. Cuidar a esas personas es necesario, porque son los que han sido posiblemente más valientes, que han tomado un paso hacia adelante, que están desafiando el poder. Y cuidar a esas personas es básico en una sociedad que quiere alcanzar problemas o lidiar con problemas mucho más complejos. Yo ahí terminaría mi comentario, y para mí en el Guernica son esas pequeñas lámparas, esas pequeñas luces que dan, irradian y ayudan a ver en la oscuridad por dónde caminar, y yo creo que eso es un paso importante, muy claro, muy concreto para seguir hacia adelante en las luchas en las que están ustedes. Gracias.
Gracias, muchas gracias. Thank you, Omar, Minor, Leslie, Ernesto, and Michael. Thank you, everyone. And now I'm going to turn it over to our host, Addison.
One of the hosts. Thank you, everybody, for enduring this, but also thank you all to the speakers for, also sitting in the sun. And you guys can totally get out of the sun now. I'm gonna say thank you to some different people that have been part of this. And we're going to have lunch at about noon. A bunch of pizzas are going to show up from Bodega. So you're all welcome to participate. In fact, I encourage you to. At 12:30, we have a discussion inside. It's going to be air conditioned. It's going to be inside. It's great seating. It's a wonderful room of this new behavioral and social sciences building. And I will say that Chico State, the Department of Geography and the Behavioral and Social Sciences College helped us get these spaces and secure this. They want to see this space utilized. And so thanks for being part of that, and thanks to them. Also, I want to give a huge shout out to a local artist who has like very much aligned with the sort of content that we have here and brought out these paintings just to adorn the space for us. Oscar Guillen is here. Yeah. Really fantastic local artist. It's been great to like get to know him through this, and I love to be able to incorporate things like that. You know, and as far as adorning the space goes, I want to say thank you to the acorn woodpeckers that have been flying overhead, and the creek. We have another city councilman, Bryce Goldstein, who's in the creek right now, and you all are welcome to as well. It is clean, it is safe. Just don't drink the water, but you can cool off here. And for the sponsors of the organizations, I want to make sure I hit them all, because we talked about Global Exchange, who is putting this whole roadshow on. I'm working for the California Trade Justice Coalition. Will over here with the camera is the director here. In addition to Will and myself, there's two workers from afar, Mira and Melissa, who've done a whole bunch of work to make this happen through the Trade Justice Coalition. And this is the Democracy Defenders Roadshow, and I thought it was really cool that we have a local Defenders of Democracy Coalition that co-sponsored it. Most of them are tabling here, the different groups there. There's Resisters, puts on regular demonstrations, has since the election of Donald Trump the second time. Yeah, we also have a showing with the Veterans Action Group. Some of them are based out of Oroville and Chico. Veterans have also been putting on demonstrations to make sure this kind of flame stays alive. As well as Indivisible, who you may know they hosted the last No Kings March, which is just huge in downtown. And I think there'll be more of that stuff to come, but they've done a really good job in recent years. And the Chico Democratic Socialists of America, a recently organized new chapter of the Chico DSA, catching this wave across the country of interest in socialist politicians and socialist politics in cities. So they have a table here too, and they're organizing, and they've been putting on educational events, and I encourage you to check it out. Yeah. As well as Chico Peace Alliance, that also has, it's people that have been doing work for decades, but Chico Peace Alliance in this current formation has not been around for very long, but they've been putting on educational events as well in partnership with Chico DSA and others, and I encourage you to check them out. They have a table as well, right? Yeah. And lastly, and specifically within the Defenders of Democracy Coalition, the California Alliance for Retired Americans, CARA, here, local chapter, also been doing great work, part of it, partners with everybody in this. And I will say one more time that Breakbeat, the local business, sponsored all this interpretation equipment. This is a really cool usage of it, but they put on awesome concerts. It's on 2nd Street next to Naked Lounge. In the evening, they have shows. It's fantastic. It's new. You can check them out on Instagram or anything else. And I really encourage you to check out that equipment they have. So thank you to them, because it wouldn't be possible to have interpretation without them. Yeah. Catalina Sanchez, one of the most important leaders in the North State, like on our side of the aisle. I'm very glad that she's part of this with us. We're also going down to Sacramento tomorrow, so she's part of that too. She's put in a lot of work to make this happen. And finally, lastly, and because this has focused on freedom of the press, the need that we have to get good information out there in an environment of disinformation. As much as the internet has given us access to more, we've been flooded with bad information, and it's really affected our democracy. It's affected the way that our politics has gone, the way that our understanding of the truth in our communities and nationally and internationally happens. But we're so fortunate to have good local press, and Michael Weber from the Chico Enterprise Record for at least like 5, maybe 6 years now has been writing here, a long time, doing really good work consistently. I don't expect them to always cover me favorably, but that's the expectation, and I appreciate when they get me on something. And here as both co-sponsors promoting the event, but also just one of the most important media outlets like today, doing in-depth investigative reporting in the Chico area is Chico Soul. It's not profit. They don't have a lot of money to pay people, but they're doing fantastic work, punching well above their weight. They're online. You can sponsor it, or you can subscribe to emails from them because they are online. You can also help support them. That's how media is going to happen these days. If you all remember, we had the Chico News and Review. They did investigative journalism. Every week, a paper would come out and be available across the city, and truth would come to light in that way. And in the pandemic, we really lost a lot of the support for media. Chico Sol's been picking up the torch in investigative journalism in the Chico area and in the North State. So very glad to have it with them. And that's all. Thank you all for being here. Hope you stay for pizza and for an event. Yeah. So, man, good buddy. Yeah. Thank you guys. Yeah. And Derek also set up this audio equipment. I really appreciate Derek and his podcast network, Polysat.